If you take a look at strategic sector prevailing in India, and I am now referring to space and nuclear technology, which is in the highest end of technologies, we are second to none in the world. For nuclear technologies, India was the sixth nation which was invited unanimously by all the other five nations to be part of a fusion reactor being done up by the global industry. And India was invited to join about 10 years ago. They recognized India's, I would say, technological development in that sector. Take a look at our major strides in the area of space. We were able to send a mission to moon at fraction of a cost. In fact, it only costed 365 crores, which will be less than $50 million to send a spacecraft to moon. A similar project for the first time in United States of America would have costed at least 50 times more. This actually shows how high you are if you wanted to be in certain segments.
Just coming straight to the topic, any significant innovation in defense brings in a discontinuous change in warfare and often dramatically tilts the balance of power. This innovation in defense can be in the grand strategy of defense, which involves diplomacy, geopolitics, etc., as you are seeing in the development of the Indo-Pacific Command in US or in the development of Quad, etc., this side. The other stream in which you can find defense innovation is in the organizational construct, operational and organizational construct. For example, our country brought in the Chief of Defense Staff to make sure that the three services, which often do not see eye to eye, as in any other country, are no longer fragmented and they can work cohesively. The third area of innovation is defense technology, which is what we are going to speak about this time. But in future, we will explore these two areas which I have spoken about and the next two also. The fourth area is capability in information management. In defense and aerospace also, in the defense area, there is deliberate revealing of certain aspects of your strengths which you have developed or are developing for deterrence. And there is also deliberate concealing that if deterrence doesn't work and war still breaks out, then there you should be able to get a surprise element through these technologies which you have concealed. And the fifth area is allied areas of defense or commerce stepping into the area of geopolitics. For example, medical devices today can be hacked. There can be malwares there. So they enter the geopolitical area. There is a lot of technology transfer from commercial area into the defense area. And also areas like energy, which have always ridden alongside with defense area and how they come together. And this is also a very important area in which Blue Circle is working hugely and under the radar. But coming back to the topic today, the defense innovation in India, where does it stand? And why defense innovation or technology innovation is important? You know, from the beginning of mankind, weapons have given decisive advantage when they have outperformed whatever technologies are there, starting with bow and arrow, which defeated the spear. Then came gunpowder, cannons, muskets, which changed the balance of power. Then in World War I, Roland Garros, by whom we have that famous stadium in Paris. on whose name. He was a pilot who could find an alternative for the pilot or his co-pilot having a gun in his hand, a machine gun kind of a gun in his hand, and shooting other aircrafts, to a way of sending those projectiles, those bullets, through the propellers space only without hitting the wings. That was also a big advantage. And then the big one came, atom bomb, in the Second World War. Then in the Gulf War, you saw guided weapon systems. And after that, many technologies have started moving simultaneously in the various arenas of war: land, sea, air, cyberspace, space, electronic war theater, etc. So this is the broad background of the space which we are going to discuss, broad context. And let me come straight away to Mr. Rajendra Bhatia, who is a veteran in this space and who has wide experience not only in India, but also in countries in Mauritius, etc., advising those countries regarding defense. So I would like to know from you, Rajendra ji, where do we stand on defense innovation? And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chowdhury. I would also say good evening to my fellow panelists and the people of the Blue Circle who are attending this webinar today. Let me start by a small little quotation. It was always said that technology denials will always remain an instrument of foreign policy. So technology development in the space of defense, and this does include aerospace, will always be giving you the leveraging to have your rightful place in the Committee of the Nations. If you take a look at our country, which is our motherland, India, India perhaps reflects totally in a different manner its technology development in other spaces vis-a-vis its reflection in the defense and aerospace industry. Just to give you an example, we are supposed to be a word power in software technologies. But you'll be surprised to know that every weapon which is being brought into the country, the software codes are generally lying either in the Western countries or in the country of the origin of OEM. Why is it so that while you are doing all this for the whole world, for your own industry, for your own weapon platforms, you are not able to do that? This actually brings me to another quote which is very interesting and which defines India in a classical manner. That is, whatever you can rightly say about this country, the opposite is also true. If you take a look at strategic sector prevailing in India, and I am now referring to space and nuclear technology, which is in the highest end of technologies, we are second to none in the world. For nuclear technologies, India was the 6th nation which was invited unanimously by all the other 5 nations to be part of a fusion reactor being done up by the global industry. And India was invited to join about 10 years ago. They recognized India's, I would say, technological development in that sector. Take a look at our major strides in the area of space. We were able to send a mission to moon at fraction of a cost. In fact, it only costed 365 crores, which will be less than $50 million to send a spacecraft to moon. A similar project for the first time in United States of America would have costed at least 50 times more. This actually shows how high you are if you wanted to be in certain segments. But if you take a look at defense technology and defense innovations, why is that we are not able to reach that point where we could call ourselves a country which could be basically Atmanirbhar Bharat? What are the enablers which can help you lead to that? And let me also tell you that whenever you're talking about Atmanirbharta in defense and aerospace, the technologies have to be homegrown. let me show you one slide. Aditya, would you please just share that slide? Let me show you in this slide what are the enablers. There was a study carried out by the group which is based out of Delhi and which I was part of, and was headed by one of our ambassadors who was in Switzerland and who was an expert on a neighboring nation which has taken major strides in technology development. There were 9 areas which were identified, which if you start doing work on those areas, you could actually bring about transformational change. And the areas are shown to you on the slide, which are developing hard and soft capabilities, reverse engineering, leadership direction, focused policy framework, re-engineering government structures, systematic reforms, civil military integration, which is the key part was trust, reforms in research institutes, and educational reforms. In India, we took only part of this in our strategic sectors. If you see that slide, we did partially in some of the areas, and some of the areas we didn't even attempt. Still, the results were phenomenal. So my closing argument in this opening session would be, I think we have the wherewithal. I think we have that inherent technological capability. The key point here is that are we being able to channel those so-called innovation streak or the animal streak for innovation into the correct direction, which leads us to so-called developing a vibrant defense industrial base, which is dependent on technologies which have been mastered and developed in the country. With this, excellent. I will hand over to Mr. Chaudhary to take on.
Excellent start, Rajendra ji. I was just thinking that when we discuss further, we should not only speak about innovation, which is homegrown, but reverse engineering also in this space. And the beautiful point which you made was that history is proof of the fact, testimony to the fact, that whenever it comes to severe competition, I don't remember the exact words you said, severe competition, then your rival will deny you the technology.
It will be an instrument of policy.
Sorry?
It will be an instrument of the foreign policy to dictate terms to you.
Absolutely. And even your ally might charge you very high for that technology. So, great points. Let me come to Mr. Neeraj Gupta. Neeraj, aap bataएं that what would you like to add to what Rajendra ji has said so far, and tell us how you look at the innovation landscape in the country for defense products from the innovation point of view, that means the quality of innovation point of view, ecosystem point of view, capital point of view, and the buying process point of view. Because here, this is a monopsony where there is usually only one buyer, at least in one country, there is one buyer. So from these perspectives, how you look at the innovation landscape, and thereafter I'll go to Ankit. And please also feel free to add any other point which might have triggered in your mind listening to Mr. Rajendra Bhatia.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. And good evening, everyone, panelists and dear participants. First of all, I would say that I would also like to add to Mr. Bhatia's comment that India has been able to send its spacecraft at ₹7 per kilometer cost, which is like an auto rickshaw.
Correct.
Running in a country. So basically what it proves that we Indians, we are very good in problem solving. You give us a problem, we are able to solve it. I think there our education really helps us a lot. However, when it comes to things like interface, making it user-friendly, I think that is where we somehow lack. And that is where some of the Western countries gain an edge over countries like us. So that needs to strengthen a little bit. Maybe it is because of the education or because of our economic, I would say, status of the country, that our needs are different than the Western countries' needs. So maybe we need to really propel that kind of thought process. When it comes to, I would say, with regards to development of the technology, my personal feeling is that here, sorry, maybe I'm a bit open in that, the government is talking a lot in terms of policies and everything. But when it comes to defense technology, I believe we need a greater support from them. When I say greater support, means that the defense technology in itself is a very, very high, is a very, very costly and, I would say, long drawn process. On top of that, our procurement system is very unpredictable. So we have so many examples. Why should we talk about examples? But the procurement process is very unpredictable. The reason I'm saying so, that the government does not support our innovation, is that there is no funding mechanism for the innovation that happens in the defense world. When I say this, that if an individual or a company goes to have a financing on the innovation or the development of the technology, I don't think so Indian banks or financial sector, they really understand that, and they support those intangible assets that we create. So an individual who wants to work, I think he is really lost how to find the money for his innovation. Second, even if a corporate is really investing his own profits, today, even the government support in giving certain incentive to the R&D effort is not there. So there, the government should also look at, when we talk about self-reliant, when we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat and all those kind of stuff. So that is one point that I wanted to make. And the third point that I would like, and if I take my own company's example, I would say that we should always look at other markets other than India for the growth of the company, because then only you can sustain your R&D efforts. You can continue to innovate and R&D and excel in a particular technology or a domain that you are into. So that's what I would say in short.
Excellent.
I don't know if I missed any question.
Excellent and very relevant points you've added. Basically, funding surely is a very important piece here, and we'll come to that in a moment. The exports which you have pointed towards are already growing by 700% in the last couple of years. That's the kind of growth first time we have seen in a very, very long time. And I would like to compliment the government for the good work which it has done in this space, and particularly using its own defense attaches to kind of promote our technologies in leading countries which buy weapons. So that is a great part, but perhaps it is not enough, and you are absolutely right. And especially when you are moving well in some area like exports, you would like to do better, and you expect more from a government or a dispensation which is trying to really do well in certain areas, and that gives you an expectation to that it does well in other areas too. Great points. So coming to Ankit, you are a startup in a very exciting space, and we would like to know what you would like to add to this piece. What are the defense innovation enablers that you have seen, and what are the areas where you feel the overall system can improve? Ankit.
Thank you, Pawan. I think it's a great platform. Really glad to be on the panel with two of the biggest industry leaders, Neeraj and Rajendra sir. my feedback in terms of the industry itself, and particularly if I look at a young company like us, I think startups have a unique role that we typically look at the gaps that the bigger players are leaving, and we try to essentially find specific value in specific sectors. We go niche first, and then once we have a niche capability which is useful, you can expand into more areas. So for startups, I think it's all about going narrow. It's all about identifying a specific area for specific value. However, the challenge is not that simple for startups as well, because as a young startup, particularly if you are first generation, you really don't have any money. And either your startup immediately starts feeding you, or you will be better off looking at technologies which are dual use, particularly, which both have uses in the civil sector as well as uses in the defense sector. In fact, a more sensible mind would say that target the civil sector first, be successful there with the same technology. And as long as it has uses in defense, you will find your market or your customer there. That customer need not be your market, because it may not bring in short-term sustainability. There is tremendous long-term value in the defense business, but the unpredictability of the long term is something which is really what is kind of hard to sustain. And I can say that from experience, because we've literally survived off this market over the last 10 plus years. And it's an arduous journey waiting. And large companies with bigger pockets have the ability to wait. But for a young startup who is looking at a technology which is, like you said, serving a monopsony, it's kind of going to be hard. And then to exacerbate the problem, Neeraj very rightly pointed out that nobody trusts that customer. So there is a problem with the nature of the customer as well. Our own banks don't trust the customer. So they would rather fund a company servicing enterprise than servicing a government entity itself. So that's also a huge problem. And particularly for a first generation entrepreneur who probably has no collateral to speak of, it's kind of doubly hard to get leverage in this sector. And investors don't look at you because, again, their fear is a monopsony, and for them, this is not a investment bet, which is getting the kind of returns a software as a service will get them in an enterprise business or a B2C business. So these are some of the challenges that we grapple with on a day-to-day basis as far as a young startup is concerned. So my typical advice to startups is that look at dual use technologies and don't be very narrow from the point of view of. So what you do for serving the country is not necessarily, one single perspective. That's from a practical standpoint. However, we started in this space because we were passionate. I remember in 2008 when the Mumbai attacks were happening, our team was sitting and said that we have actually developed this technology. What are we doing with it? And that's how we started along this journey. And we were fortunate to sustain, even though it was hard, and were able to pull through. But there are challenges, and I also wanted to second the point Neeraj had made regarding the inability for the government to induct innovation. The problem is that when you are in the very early stages of a technology, even the customer is not aware of what is really his requirement. And typically the specifications that will come out will be chimera specifications with the head of the lion, body of a bison, and tail of a snake. So it's kind of, everyone's basically then chasing, and then he also wants to make sure that there are 3 people delivering that same technology, right? Head of a bison or whatever, right? So that is the challenge. And therefore, and it's nothing to do with the customer's inability, right? It's just inexperience overall. And therefore, I think to encourage sustainability in such an environment, there has to be a way to break away from the conventional approach of spending public resources, which is to find area which is non-competitive and to be able to fuel only in that scenario. There are a lot of models coming up, but one model which I feel is going to make life really, really interesting is that make some minimum purchase commitments. If specifications are not fully met, give the closest guy something. If the specifications are fully met, but you're the only guy, give him something anyhow, something more in fact, so that everyone who's chasing is really believing that there is seriousness, and that everyone looking at these specifications and looking at these opportunities is going to put enough thought before going after, like I said, completely incongruent set of instructions. There will be more investigations, more responsibility, and there could be cappings, there could be whatever is required, but something has to come, because this mad chase for trials and demonstrations at no cost and no commitment, where there is no skin in the game of the end user apart from his time, it's kind of plaguing the industry and the innovation front in a big way.
Great points. So let me summarize some of the issues which you have raised and take the ball to Mr. Rajendra Bhatia and Neeraj Gupta. So Rajendra ji, what Ankit is saying is, IDEX, etc., he has alluded to it. They are perhaps not enough or are not having sufficient funds for all this development and right up to testing. The second point he's saying is that the specifications are changing. So by the time you might actually come out with that technology, it may be obsolete because the world has moved. But when the world moves, the cost of the movement of the world is borne only by the innovator, not by the end user. So he's saying that there should be something other than NCNC. And please explain NCNC also to us. And on that note, I will come to Neeraj after you on Mark 1 and Mark 2. पहले आप बताइए. We can't hear you. Yeah.
You want me to start first, or you want?
Yes, you start. Rajendra ji, you start, please.
Okay. NCNC stands for no cost, no commitment. And NCNC is not designed for innovation. NCNC is designed for off-the-shelf products, which means it is actually designed for people who are sitting outside this country, because there was not much development happening in this country. You have a product, you come for no cost, no commitment trials, and you come, if you're successful, you get the order, and then you fleece the so-called the monopsony customer. The other models which are prevalent and which actually need to be looked at are FCNC, which is full cost and no commitment, which means we say that this is the technological development I need. I am ready to fund you fully, but I will not commit on the numbers which I need. Or the second is no cost, full commitment, which is that you bring your product. If you are spending your money, I give you commitment that I will buy it from you if you are successful. For the innovation, the best model would remain FCNC, which means full cost is given for innovation, no commitment is given, but if you have developed a product which is required for the people, I'm sure even the monopsony customer will fall for it. The second point which I would like to kind of support what Neeraj said on specifications. It is not only the fact that you get to have a bison head and a snake's tail. There's another problem which comes up on the specification is that your hands are tied. The specification may read that the vehicle weight should be 10 tons. It will have a maximum speed of 200 km/h, and it will have an engine which is 900 cc capacity, and it will use transmission which has got, say, 4 gears or 9 gears. Now, these things are really killer of any innovation. This may not even be possible. It may not even be feasible in the specifications. So what you require is you need a vehicle which travels 200 km/h. It should not be none of your business whether I use a 1900 cc engine or a 4-liter engine. So that is what I will just add on to what Neeraj was talking about specification. And also the fact that I totally agree with him what he says on that specifications are a one pick from here, another pick from there. And if you go by the history, if you were to pick up feature of all the most beautiful people in the world, it's not necessary that you will get a person who is worth looking at. So this is exactly the problems which our system is facing. And since these were the two issues you wanted me to comment upon, I'll now hand over to Neeraj to probably answer the second part of the question.
Right. So, Neeraj, before I come to you, let me flesh out this the discussion a little more. So, what Rajinder Bhatia just said, that whatever specifications are, they should be functional and technology agnostic. You should not say that this engine of 1900 cc, etc., should be required. You should just specify what function this machine should perform. Very right. And that will also reduce the valley of death, because many things will die in the valley of death because that technology cannot deliver that whatever you are saying. So it is better to be technology agnostic. The second point which I would ask you is, you are exporting to more than 85 countries. How easy is it to convince foreign countries to buy from you? Do they not ask you that does your own country buy it from you or not? So from the export side, because you are stressing on exports, does the fact that our innovations are not so popular in India itself, does it come in the way? And my third point is regarding reverse engineering. What are your views on reverse engineering as far as innovation, as far as its role in innovation is concerned? Neeraj.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, you asked about what is required to be successful in exports, and if the customer is not asking for if you have sold in India or not. Most of the countries, they probably, we are not into big systems, so we are more into products which are, I would say, in the range of $100 to $10,000. So these are not very large systems. So what they really typically ask is certain certifications to prove the product, and lot of time they really ask for customer reference. Where have you sold? So they do not specifically mention per se that if you have sold to your own home country or not. So that's one thing. And somebody to be successful in marketing, as I touched upon before as well, as I said, Indians are very good in development of technology. What really needs to be done is how really you really package a product. When I say package, it means that its interface, its look and feel also should be world class. And there we lack. And I believe if Indians work a little bit on that, I think there's no dearth for Indians to be successful in exports. Second topic you asked about innovation. Does India not really respects our own innovation? I won't say something like that. But as Mr. Bhatia mentioned, that because of the procurement process, like that I need a vehicle that drives 200 kilometers an hour with 900 cc engine with 4 gears, I think what they should really specify, and I believe a lot of Western countries do like that, is they just define their problem area or their need, and then they leave up to the companies to offer their own solution. So if something like this also is done in India, I think that will also help a lot and might also propel a new level of innovation. Because otherwise you are saying me to run, but at the same time you are tying my hands and legs with certain aspects. So I think that's a very good point made by Mr. Bhatia. With regards to reverse engineering, so my personal feeling, why do we really need to do that? Are we not really capable of developing things on our own? I think if I look at the example of IdeaForge, they are highly successful company today. Their products are being proven, tested, competing with the best in the world. So what is the need to do reverse engineering? I personally don't understand why do we need to do that.
Great points.
So I think, did I answer something?
Yeah. No, great, very, very good points. And the best point which I liked was among the so many good points was the look and feel. And we did a webinar on aerospace and defense marketing and advertising. And I think that we fully concur with. On the reverse engineering piece, we were looking at, for example, at the AI stack. Now, AI is not one technology, but several technologies. And if I was to look at AI, then there is the data there, then there is the talent, then the next layer is algorithm, which the talent will convert into that algorithm, then the applicability, then the hardware, and then the final integration of everything. So 6 layers of AI. Now, in some of these layers, we are good. And some of these layers, we are not so good. Even US is realizing that it is good only in the talent, in the algorithm, and the hardware. And China is beating it, and other countries are also beating it. Israel is also beating it in data, in application. So is it possible that we have an innovation which combines the best of both worlds? And we don't go for random offshoring because it is no longer possible in the current geopolitics. However, we look at friendshoring. We look at those countries which have a similar democratic setup like ours, political setup like ours, which have a history of peace with us, which have a market-based economy, which have a good protection of IPR rights, etc. Is that possible? And let me ask you that why I'm asking you this is, for example, if the competitor is doing something and he is not reinventing the wheel, we might be a little behind him if we plan to make everything here. For example, China, let us say. China is reverse engineering a lot of Russian technology. And it is doing that quite blatantly, but it is in the same block right now. So this is the perspective which I wanted to bring in. And I'm sure you will be able to illuminate it with a better spectrum of light or a unique spectrum of light which you bring. Neeraj.
Sir, I fully agree with you. I think today reinventing the wheel is not really a good idea, because then it may not be cost effective. So collaborative way of working is also that we do at times, and it creates a win-win situation. Sir, while you were talking, I got another point where I would talk a little bit divert from the topic, but like, for example, today we look at tactical radios, right? So I'm just giving one where the Indian procurement system is so much full of confusion. If I look at that, I personally feel even the customer doesn't know what exactly he wants to buy. Within the same group, if you will talk to 10 officers, those 10 officers may have a different idea of the same system. So that is another point that really, again, I support the ideas of Ankit or Mr. Bhatia, that needs to really be streamlined in India. But talking about the collaborative effort, I still believe, yes, that's something very good. But then, isn't it very restrictive? If it can be bit open in nature, I think that will be a good win-win for both the companies or countries or whatever we are talking about. Like, for example, today, sir, we took a lot of Russian technologies, but then when Ordnance Factory really wants to export them, they do not have the authority to export them. So that is where a lot of innovation doesn't happen at Ordnance Factories, because they are not really challenged by the international community for the international projects. And they continue to just keep on relying on the Russian technology as Ordnance Factories for their bringing in the technology into the country.
Great, super points. So many a time the buyer himself doesn't know what he wants. And it can also be because technocrats are not leading this space in the bureaucracy or in the purchasing cohorts. That's a great point. Let me ask Ankit regarding IDEX and IDEX 4G. Just let everybody know through a couple of lines what is IDEX and IDEX 4G. And thereafter, I'll come to Mr. Rajendra Bhatia regarding DRDO's role in innovation. Has it been only facilitative or inadvertently sometimes restrictive also? And I would also like to go further on what Neeraj said regarding ordnance factories. Ordnance factories should have their own research wing, or they should depend on some outside source only like DRDO. Those will be my points for you, Rajendra Bhatia ji. And Ankit, please tell us about IDEX and IDEX 4G.
Yeah, so IDEX is a great initiative in the sense that it has the right spirit in terms of providing funding for innovations. They qualify companies with their ideas and they give them funding for prototype development. However, I think one of the issues that has been highlighted in the media, particularly with the program, is that and IDEX 4G does the same for innovations done by 4Gs who are currently serving with the forces and are still coming up with innovations in their labs. Both are excellent areas, but given that the funding amount is about 1.5 crores for a young startup to develop technology, particularly for defense, in that kind of funding may not be feasible up to to a large extent, and that's probably, and then the number of fields in which you can do that also becomes a little limited. Maybe software development where only people are involved, there could be something envisaged in a low investment because you're not spending on hardware and you need to budget for people cost, and people cost also to that extent is only applicable as long as you can develop it within the time frame that you can survive that money for. But beyond that, hardware typically, given the runs, given the delays, number of prototypes you need to build, and finally, if you want to build the prototype to a certain specification, you will come up short in terms of coming out with the product. You may come out with a prototype also of very specific low, low infra requirement kind of products, but very, very intensive products that require very high technology, where, for example, somebody wants a fiber optic gyro or somebody wants a very, very high precision IMU and those kind of things. Those things may add up to a very large number and they eat up most of the funding available there. So in a way, I feel that IDEX has to be coupled with external funding. That's when it will become properly successful, or the funding itself could be concentrated to less number of people. Maybe, for example, what Defense Innovation Unit in US is doing right now, wherein they give about $1 million to various companies to make things for their requirement. And their process is that you convert something commercial to defense kind of a system, and they give about $1 million. So maybe that's a more palatable range of investment, which will probably see more success in terms of giving people slightly more freedom, because when you are starting developing hardware, it's not very linear. It's very iterative. Iterations in software are not that challenging as compared to iterations in hardware. So I feel that the minimum, we can reduce the number of people we target this for, increase the funding, and that may see larger success, a greater percentage of success in terms of outcome. But as an initiative, the heart is in the right place. Fine tuning like this can, over the years, evolve this into a potent force, in my opinion.
Very good. In fact, you have very well said the heart is in the right place. That even if you have given only 498.8 crores and it is spread too thin, just 1.5 crores per company, the desire to do is evident. I would also say in IDEX 4G, the mind is also in the right place, because the 4G knows the best. What are the challenges he faces? and you embed him in the innovational ecosystem, there is a chance he might urge you to really find out the solution which works in the field. So, and that has often been found. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So one point that came up, in one of these interactions earlier was that a lot of times when prototyping happens at the level of, the effort that people put in the forces, and a prototype or a initial prototype is made, I think there is a certain sense of, disillusionment with respect to pricing when it comes to a private vendors pricing for the same equipment. Because I think, there's a little bit of that gap, particularly when innovation happens in-house versus when innovation is bought from outside. And we face it every day. Like, for example, when we buy components, sometimes we may do the sum of parts, but we'll find that the cost of the system is actually much higher, even for us. But I think this sum of parts kind of method and exposure to that sum of parts sometimes blinds people to what it really takes to commercialize and do it sustainably. I think for businesses, our heart is at the right place in the sense that we just want to do it forever for the customer. And the only thing that can help us do it forever is what we need to do. And we need to budget for the customer's cycle. We need to budget for the customer's approach, demand, uncertainty, so that we can be there for the customer, for the life cycle of what he supports. So I think sometimes that appreciation gets missed when there is that kind of exposure, and we end up suffering a lot because of that. But really that understanding will come up when some of these people actually become entrepreneurs and realize, okay, my math was totally wrong, right? From that sense. So I'm not sure where this will go, but that's a risk, as well as maybe there is a potential reward in the end of that journey.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And in fact, this point came up on the Blue Circle app also the other day. One gentleman, he said that should the veterans who are coming out of armed forces, should they not be co-opted on the advisory boards of startups in the defense space? And I fully agree, they should be. They have a lot of stamina. They have a lot of exposure. They also have good awareness. Many of them have good awareness of the purchase process and the adoption process. So surely I would ask Siddharth if his connection is okay, he should pull up that comment, because I really liked it a lot. So on that note, great point, Ankit. On that note, let me go to Rajendra Bhatia and ask him that the DRDO piece, Rajendra ji, the DRDO piece and the ordnance factories, should they have their in-house research and development wings, or should they depend on an outside vendor, overarching or outside vendor? Rajendra ji.
So let me first take on DRDO. DRDO was established maybe about in 1960s and is now almost a organization which has finished its golden jubilee 50 years plus. I think it was 67 when it was established. The key point about DRDO, and let me first tell you that it actually, like a typical system, if you take a look at what is the money which is being invested by DRDO for actually product development vis-a-vis what they are spending on their infrastructure and internal expenditure, including their own scientists, the ratio would be very badly skewed to the second part, which is the infrastructure and their own investments. Our own calculation at some time was that is 70% which goes towards infrastructure setting up and development of their in and around vis-a-vis the product cost, which was about 30%. Now, there was a Ramarao committee which was formulated some years ago. The recommendations on that committee were very, very clear. And a part of it is, of course, getting implemented. One is that there is a feeling that DRDO needs to focus on certain niche technologies which private industry and other players in the country may not be in a position to take it up for the huge cost involved with no future. So the focus here should be on niche technologies which should be done by them. But the problem which I feel which happened was that instead of concentrating only on the niche technologies, they started to get down to the design engineering of the products and also trying to become an integrator, because they would have small vendors giving them subsystems, which they would try to make it into a system and were not really very successful. If you take any product, there is a technology readiness levels which starts from 1 and goes to 9. 8 and 9 are manufacturing mass production. 7 is also in production. 1 to 4 is fundamental technology development, and 5, 6, 7 are engineering and making of prototypes. I have a strong feeling that somewhere after TR5, it should be the Indian industry, and it means industry which is both in the private sector and the public sector, which should get involved. We have 1 or 2 very good advantages, which are perhaps best in the world. One is that we are very good with frugal engineering. Second is, Indians have a fantastic idea of a 3-dimensional aspect which they can visualize and actually bring into place when they are doing CAD/CAM designs. With both these technologies that we can do with frugal engineering with very little cost, and like you, Neeraj, rightly mentioned, 7 rupees to a kilometer going to moon is less than a auto rickshaws the fare today. So these advantages, unless you fully exploit with the industry, DRDO would not be able to achieve what they've set out to achieve. There's a major change which has happened in the last few years. Now they have started looking more at system level. They have started to take industry on board as development cum production partners, but the results of all these efforts are still far away. So my own personal opinion, DRDO is a must get focused into TR1 to 4 or 5 and leave the rest to the production agencies. And production agencies must be both industry and private public sector, because you can't leave one set of players out of this game. Coming to the second point, which was on the ordnance factories. See, we often say about it that what you receive in TOT is actually not technology. What you receive is basically a set of drawings. So at best, with best of the knowledge, you can get to know what was the know-how, but know-why still escapes. The know-why can only come through to you, and when you have your own integral research and development, may even not be research, but development and engineering centers to upgrade, to take the products to next level, to continuously change. If you continue to depend without this, you will still continue to have your control systems which are based on 486 chips even today, when the world has advanced to maybe the next level of technology. So having research and development organization in-house are a must. I also strongly believe that each of the public sector undertaking must be run as a corporate with full way of having a profit and loss and balance sheet kind of evaluation being done, not just like a cost center as ordnance factories were till or they are till today. And having integral research and development is a must. You can't do without that. So with these observations, Mr. Chaudhary, is there anything else you want me to add?
I think I'll come back to you.
Sure.
Let me go to Neeraj. Neeraj, I would like you to comment on the testing. See, innovation with this kind of a buying process is not complete till testing happens. So how equipped is our ecosystem for testing services, for validating and verifying those technologies which are ready to be purchased if they are that match grade? So where do we stand there as an industry? Would you like to comment on this? And Ankit, you could also comment on this if you wish after Neeraj. And then before we go to some questions which are coming on my mobile, and I will read them out, and also the names of the people who are asking. Neeraj.
Sir, you reminded me of something. In 2006-07, we were working on developing UAVs. And at that point of time, there was no, sorry?
Sorry, developing, I lost you for a minute.
Developing
About 30 seconds.
UAV,
Okay.
unmanned aerial vehicles.
Yeah.
At that point of time, there was no proper regulation how to test a UAV or make some trials or testing evaluation. So I would say that since then, the government has come a long way. Today, DRDO labs are available to the industry. Even the government design bureaus or their training colleges, they all are helping out very openly for testing, trial, and evaluation. So I think that part government has really taken very well. I would really like to congratulate the government on this part. Uh, and I think today this is not really a challenge, to be honest. But yes, again, I also have a lot of experience for exports. I will take that as well in the same question. But yes, when we go for international projects, then our testing is very skewed towards the Indian way of testing. So if that can also be developed in India, that will also help a lot in defense industry to have the proper approvals and certifications as per international standards or norms as well. So that is what I have to say on this.
Excellent answer. Ankit, would you like to add to testing expenses and the availability of those testing labs and services here in India?
So I think it's a matter of scale, honestly. I think what Neeraj is referring to, and the kind of products that even we make in terms of size and everything, we don't really have a lab challenge. It's more of an awareness challenge. Sometimes we just don't know how many labs are there, which are available, when are they available. And so there is a lot of information arbitrage as compared to availability. So there are programs going on about defense testing facilities. But a lot of times I ask the question that are we limited by the testing facilities, or are we limited by awareness of them, as well as demand and supply gap, if at all. So I feel that at the lab level, a lot of things are available. But probably Rajendra sir would have a different experience given the size that they are building for. But for our size, we are okay. We are able to manage in most cases. But at the same time, practical experience, gaining practical experience on field is kind of hard. For example, if you're building for Siachen, you don't have a facility that can simulate Siachen on ground, and you don't have access to Siachen, unless and until the user is willing to spend equal amount of effort with you in giving you that access. So literally, he has to be present with you on the field with a large inventory of collaterals before he can give you access to those areas. So I think there is a little bit of that challenge, that some of the extreme environments that we need to operate in, those environments are not easily available. So for me, my dream UAV testing facility is a large warehouse sized pressure chamber where I can simulate both extreme cold and extreme hot with a really large wind tunnel along with it. So it's just something really large at a different scale altogether that simulates all my conditions at maybe Lucknow, Chennai, Mumbai, wherever, right? Doesn't matter. So that would be probably the need of the hour. But at the small lab level, things are available largely. And even to that extent, mill grade testing is available in India. Like I said, there is a lot of arbitrage in terms of who is certified for what. Those challenges are there. There are a lot of people who are certified for some things, a lot of people who are certified for others. So it's kind of hard to find that. And on top of that, defense will test in their own way. Defense will test in their own way. So it's kind of hard there because in the end, you have to get tested in their own labs anyhow.
Absolutely. And the other day you were saying that there are so much variety of terrains available here, such congested areas, etc. That itself provides a living lab for your product.
Yeah, I mean, if you can fly in the real world in India, that's, I think, awesome. The real world is too congested.
Pawanji, I would like to add to this testing facilities because we involved it in a very big way. It was year 2014. Mr. Parikar was the defense minister, and the ranges and test facilities owned by the government were not available to the private sector at that time. We had made a gun, but we were not able to fire it in any of the ranges of the country because First question they would ask is that who's the OEM? When we say we are the OEM, they would not even take that seriously. And in any case, range was not available as per the government regulation. Things have gone a long way from that situation. Today, ranges are available, but for weapon testing ranges, the infrastructure in the country is really very, very less. In fact, it takes months to get a slot, and those slots are so restricted that it is not easy to actually put the weapon system through trials. So I think we need to have some more infrastructure coming up. In fact, there is already a government initiative coming up, which is being done along with ENY for making test facilities of all kinds for weapon platforms. And they are looking at, I would say, private industry participation into establishment of these test facilities. Just a
You know
little.
what I really like about this panel is it is so well informed. I was at another panel for a short while when I heard Mr. Baba Kalyani also say this, that weapon testing facility ranges are not available in India. And great point you have added. Let me now, because we have kind of run out of time, but we have a huge number still with us. And I really appreciate our viewers that they are so well informed because they ask such questions and they like to listen to our experts who are also so well informed. So I will just go to just go to my mobile, and because the most of the questions which have come there are before the questions which we have received here, and I will name the people who are asking those questions. Then I'll weave them into 2 or 3 questions where I bring in their points of view and try to accommodate as many people as possible. So the gentlemen who have sent their questions are Ashwini Sharma, Aviation Advisor of Edgeversity, Shivam Chauhan of Samsung, VB Atma Ram, CMD of 3S Sensors, Deepak Koharkar, Director Photonics, Biju Babu, CEO Business Group, Haider Ali, Analyst BIS Research, Manoj Jain, Director Smart City Solutions, and Amol Mali, AGM L&T Defense. So let me just ask the first question to Neeraj Gupta. The question is that 100% FDI in defense production, will it spark up innovation or bring in an ecosystem of innovation which we might be lacking otherwise, and those cuisines which that company may make today, we can make tomorrow because those recipes will have the ecosystem to develop them. Neeraj Gupta.
Sir, I think that will certainly help in my view, because if we look at examples of Maruti Suzuki or Hero Honda, so if these companies have come to India, has they not developed the ecosystem of good automobile manufacturing practices into India? I think it helps. So I think if we really, the large OEMs who really hesitate at times to give their technology in the hands of other country or other company, I think this will certainly help. That's my view on that. Because I'm also certainly looking at such options in various other countries. So I think it will help. The 100% FDI, this will develop the ecosystem.
Okay, great. Rajendra ji, the second question is for you. This is from CMD of 3S Sensors and Systems Technology, and it is getting repeated in different ways by others also. We have products developed indigenously and demonstrated the performance to the government agencies on NCNC basis, where the requirement is definite, but the procurement actions are kept pending for years, even after acceptance of necessity, without getting into tendering process. What could be the solution in the present environment?
Tough question to answer. First part is that acceptance of necessity means nothing. Acceptance of necessity is a realization that customer needs a particular product. We actually make so much of song and dance about AON, and government gives so many AONs granted. It actually means nothing, neither for the industry nor for the business. The first step for industry is perhaps the issue of the request for proposal, which is what is called RFP. Now, government has also realized that the time which is being taken for the time where expression of interest is asked for, or what is called as RFI, to actually placement of contract on conservative side is about 5 to 7 years, and on the non-conservative side, there is no end. It may last 2 decades. If such is the procurement cycle, the technologies actually will undergo a major transformation during that period, and you will end up buying items which are not state-of-the-art technology, but perhaps which are in electronics field probably reaching obsolescence. So there are some guidelines which have been issued. The problem with our country is that we make reasonably good policies, but our implementation structure is rather poor. Just to give you an example, the DAC or the DAP or the DPP, whatever you call it, which is the procurement Bible, does lay out that in 36 months, a procurement cycle should complete, which means start from AON to placement of contract, it should be 36 months max. This is also large. In fact, we should try and cut it down to 24 months, but I don't even recall one major project which would have ever finished less than 60 months. Even 60 is a little far-fetched idea. So I would say policymakers are alive to it, people are alive to it, but the implementation of that policies are still not very much there, and hence these delays which are taking place. I would also tell the people who are in the band, where they are trying to get into this area, AON is at best good for excitement. It's not good for your balance sheet.
Great point. And now coming to the next question, and this is for you, Ankit. When can we see India producing Reaper or Global Hawk like drones? And are there drone ports which are going to come up in India anytime soon? Ankit.
So last question first, drone ports is sort of a pipe dream from the policy perspective as well. Broadly, if I were to understand some of the use cases for drone ports, largely they will be used for logistics, and logistics will be tied to, when we start expanding into logistics drones as well. So my expectation is that it'll start in remote areas first, and it will come into urban centers once we learn a lot from remote areas in doing essential deliveries there and coming on the way down to here. But a lot of it will likely not be supported by pure commercial activity. It may have to be funded. Then in terms of producing Reaper and Global Hawk class of systems, again, these are the areas where I agree with Rajendra sir that since they are very, very specifically defense-oriented systems, unless a large company like Kalyani's or Tata's, Reliance, or L&T, they get into a TOT or some arrangement with larger players to just build it here. For a private enterprise to start building it from scratch, unless it is a DRDO where they're already making a mail and struggling on that side, but probably will finish sometime soon. So broadly, it's just kind of hard to get into that kind of development for a startup, particularly. For a large business doing it off some base technology, I think it's a viable proposition, but that's not likely to happen very easily unless there is demand which is firm for India. And as far as ab initio development is concerned, DRDO is already on it, and I think if that effort can be boosted or sped up, we should get there. I think technology-wise, it's not unthinkable. It's just the courage to go behind it and invest behind it that it is the challenge, because technology-wise, honestly, if we were to spend any time behind it, it will happen. Why will it not happen, right? I mean, I don't see a reason why technologically it is challenging beyond a point.
Yeah.
It's just experience.
No, very good point. And on that note, I come to the last question to Neeraj Gupta. And this question is repeating itself, and it also came from Ankit. This is the funding piece. There are several questions. Some they have come from Shaurya, Nitin also, and others which I just named, where they are saying how will how can these dreams be funded better? Other than government has already given something. How it can give more, and how can you attract, or what can be the other sources of funding? Any ideas on this, Neeraj? Because not many companies, not many corporates are the big ones particularly, are not many of them are pushing this space. Neeraj.
Sir, for startups, my best suggestion to them would be to tie up with owner-driven companies, because then they can take quick decisions. Otherwise, I don't think so. In India, there is a lot of mechanism for defense startup funding. Apart from IDEX, which also, as we discussed, is very limited, does not really helps beyond a point in going further. So as far as funding is concerned, I think that's the only way I see for a startup to grow from a point where they are. Because, sir, I saw one example, and I will give you this live example. There was a company last year at Lucknow Def Expo. Somebody came to my booth, very senior gentleman from the ex-army, and he said, "Neeraj, come and I want to show you a very nice startup." And they developed a UGV, unmanned ground vehicle, with some firing capability and all that stuff. Probably this gentleman would have spent like maybe 3, 4, 5 crores to develop a prototype. Now, this new gentleman, which young boy, bubbling with thoughts, energy, would have used all his resources, maybe from his parents, from friends, his own, to develop this particular UGV. Now, but after this UGV, where he goes further? Because when he goes for trial and evaluation to the army, the RFP comes, which is entirely different from the UGV that he has developed. So where he goes? Now, he just has an idea of developing a UGV. Now, the tender will ask for 5 crores of EMD, will ask for 3 or 4 samples on NC basis. So again, he needs of 20-25 crores of rupees. And that too with a no commitment, whether the RFP will go beyond a point, or it will scrap or come again, or the whole requirement will go to zero. So I think from my point of view, that startup is really taking a big, huge risk. And after he is not successful, I think his morale, his enthusiasm, he gets so demotivated. So I think we are just spoiling the startup ecosystem in India with that. So my only advice to these startups, please really arrange for the funding before you really put your hand into an idea. Before you really think into it, please manage your financial resources. Otherwise, it might create so much of stress for you that you may just get disturbed out of it.
I think on the funding piece, just to continue the conversation while we are waiting for Mr. Pawan, he's back.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Ankit, how has been your experience?
Yeah, like I said at the beginning itself, it's kind of hard to get funding in this space, and like it has to do with the customer impression more than anything else. Because if you look at a defense startup in US, like for example Anduril, there is no dearth of money being pumped behind that startup, and the amount of money being pumped, and their only stated customer is the US defense. And all they are working very hard towards is manning the Mexico border. So, and they are worth probably about $5 billion today. So if you were to look at that kind of a impression that our customer carries, I think that's the area where we are struggling a lot. And if that can improve by some concerted measures by the government. Like I said, some of these initiatives which allow induction of technology and access to technology in that one sense, I think we should get better.
My personal feeling for this defense sector, technology sector to grow, funding is one of the biggest issue, whether it is a startup or a big corporate or a medium-sized company. If you go at trades, nobody is willing to discount your bills because they do not have a definite date of payment.
Exactly.
So even that banking sector which government is pushing, right? Even the government bills they are not willing to buy of the which has a sovereign government guarantee. So there are no private equity funds to do the funding of defense startups. So I think that is one of the big areas that the Indian defense industry has to grow and the technology has to grow in India. The funding mechanism, there should be a certain level of respect for the funding of these startups.
No, absolutely. Even for
Absolutely,
orders,
there should be some
companies who have orders, they
Sorry,
don't have money.
I'm interrupting.
Sure. Absolutely.
Go ahead, please. You were saying something, Ankit?
No, I was just saying that even if you have firm orders, no bank is willing to give you capital, which is the sad part. These are orders given by your government after, beating your product through heaven and hell, and still there is no money you are willing to trust behind your own order. So I think somewhere we have to get out of that conundrum, maybe give some, primary collateral free loans to entrepreneurs who have orders, at least, help them scale, help them service the country. And then we will have, certain great stuff happening. Even after you go through all hell to get to an order, you don't have money to execute because nobody trusts you.
I just wanted to add here, there is another part to it.
Very, very good point.
There is a earnest money deposit, which is to be given in the form of BG. And then there is a performance bond and guarantee, which is also to be given in the form of a bank guarantee. And like Ankit is saying, startups probably have to keep that kind of FT to get a bank guarantee from banks, even to service the order which is in their hand. This, of course, is a major problem with the startups and small companies.
Sir, I would like to add something.
No, great point. And yeah, please.
Sir, sorry, before closing, I know
Please,
we are running short of time. My one thing that I would like to add is that when the present government, Sri Narendra Modi ji, started the whole concept of Make in India, defense manufacturing was one of the prime pillars of that.
Yes.
Right? And it remains to be, and India desires to be self-reliant, Atmanirbhar Bharat. We are talking about all these things. My question is, if the sector is so much of a priority, then unlike textiles, unlike IT sector, or sorry, electronics, why don't we have schemes like SPECS, where 25% capital subsidy is given to the company? Then there is 15%, at least UP state subsidy. I'm sure there must be similar subsidies in other states as well. And then on top of that, there's a PLI scheme. So if this is a sector that government really wants to come up to be Atmanirbhar Bharat, why government is not thinking of such schemes in this?
Yeah.
It's my humble request to the government. Rather, there is nobody willing to fund, as Ankit is saying.
Absolutely, and we will add your voice to this. And just saying it from an investor's point of view, whenever an investee asks me that how should I get funding, I say there are 3 G's which you should concentrate on: gene, genre, and geography. When we go to the investor, it should not be a scattered approach. That person should have the gene of investing in defense. Second is genre. What stage your business is on, and whether he invests in that stage of business or not. And third is geography, whether he invests in this part of the world or not. If we will do this, there is a greater chance of getting success rather than the easy route of just bombarding. Having said that, still for the armed or defense forces or defense companies, it is more challenging to get funding. And if it is such a priority product, such a priority space, why should not there be priority lending to it? As Ankit asked for, and as Neeraj endorsed, that not only priority lending, there should be subsidizing of the initiative here. You check the bona fides of the company and subsidize the initiative. So great point. There are so many other fine questions which have come, and I will request Siddharth to make sure that these are answered on the app, because the questions are as good as the answerers. So the questioners are as good as the people who are answering. They're focusing and coming to you with very fine questions. But we will have to close here, and I would say that Narendra Modi ji, who I appreciate in this space, he has done major work. He says, Veer Bhoge Vasundhara, which means the courageous will inherit the earth. I would like to say Veer Bhoge Vasundhara or Chatur Bhoge Vasundhara. By Chatur, I mean creative, not only clever, but also creative. And that is why innovation is so important. And I would like to appeal to him that this capital piece, capital funding piece, should seriously be looked at, and the procurement procedures which are being simplified should be further simplified, so that India should never become a सोने की चिड़िया, क्योंकि सोने की चिड़िया को तो नोच नोच खा गए बाज. इस बार बनेंगे तो सोने का बाज बनेंगे, जिसकी तरफ कोई भी आंख उठा कर ना देख सके गलत तरीके से. सो उसको बनने के लिए हमें थोड़ी और मदद चाहिए इस सेक्टर को. And that is what we would like to air before the Prime Minister as well as the Raksha Mantri, and hope our voices will reach there. And on that note, I'll pass on the baton to Siddharth if his connection is okay. Siddharth.
Thank you very much, sirs. It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to hear you all. Our leaders and I, we've taken home several nuggets from today's conversation, and I'm still getting messages from leaders on the app as well as on my WhatsApp as well. So thank you very much once again. We've already taken a lot of your time, so thank you very much. And thank you to the leaders in the audience also for always joining in and for always sharing excellent questions. For the questions which cannot have been addressed due to the paucity of time, we'll share the relevant questions with the leaders in the panel and also request some of their time for it, and also share some of the questions and the answers in the community app as well. So for leaders who are interested to join the platform, to be a part of the aerospace and defense circle, and also get access to the other allied communities which we're building, I've already shared the link to the app in the section. I will also be sharing your respective invitation codes over email, and request you all to also join the community to help foster stronger growth. So thank you very much, sirs, once again, and please do stay safe, and hope for having more such future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Great panel. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Jai Hind.
Bye-bye.